It's my nerd world, and welcome to it, Depeche Mode, the podcast. And this week's episode, I'll give you my review of Memento Mori.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
It is my nerd world, Depeche Mode, the podcast. Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out the show once again this week. I really do appreciate it. Now, if you happen to be listening on YouTube, there is no video this week, and I'm going to keep the episode relatively short. We'll see how it shakes out in the end. I hurt my leg about a week ago. I live here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and there was quite a bit of ice on the ground. Taking my dog for a walk last week on Wednesday, and I slipped and fell and just did a number on my calf. So, because of that, it has been difficult getting around the house and doing my regular job as a talk show radio host. So, no video today, just audio, but thank you so much for checking out the show. Please like and subscribe on YouTube, and if you're listening to the podcast, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. So, I'm going to get right to it. There's a lot of information, a lot of interviews around the band and audio that I will be sharing on the show on future episodes. Some really interesting commentary coming from the band as it relates to Martin Gore working with Richard Butler on the songwriting process. I have some thoughts and questions with regard to that I want to ask of you on future episodes. And a ton of listener feedback over the course of the past week, including the listener spotlight. For the sake of this week's episode, I am just going to focus specifically on my thoughts on Memento Mori, out on March 24th. Can't tell you how I've heard it, obviously cannot share it, but I will share with you my thoughts on the entirety of the album. If you listen to last week's episode, I had only heard snippets at that point in time. Now I've had the opportunity to listen to the album several times now, so I can give a much more detailed review than what I did last week. And I want to put a couple of caveats up front. I've been sharing my thoughts on the album and asking and answering questions on YouTube over the course of the past few days under the My Nerd World up on YouTube. And the commentary around sort of what I've been sharing online has been really interesting, as has been the commentary on the Halo forum. I know a lot of people have just now found the show, haven't been listening to it for very long. There's a lot of trepidation and take what I'm saying with a grain of salt commentary around what I've mentioned online. So with that being said, and I totally understand that, something that I've mentioned on the show, if you're newer to the show, is that all of this is subjective. I host a Star Wars podcast as well, and the Star Wars fandom is certainly way more divided than the Depeche Mode fandom, although I have seen a little bit of what I typically see within the fandom of Star Wars this time around, ahead of the release of Memento Mori, more so than what I've seen in the past, but it could just be because I'm paying closer attention. So I want to say up front, this is all subjective. I've been a fan of Depeche Mode since 1985, when I first heard Shake the Disease on K-Rock. Met the band a couple of times over the course of all of these years. I've seen them live 33 times. Much like I say as it relates to Star Wars, I saw Star Wars in the theater when I was 5 years old. I became a fan of Star Wars before I was a fan of anything else, and I became a fan of Depeche Mode before I was a fan of any other band. My life completely changed after hearing Shake the Disease and then going and searching for that album, finding Black Celebration, and then waiting for the release of Music for the Masses, which was the first album that I ever purchased in store that I was anticipating from the band when I became a fan. Had the privilege of going to the Rose Bowl show. So for those that are newer to the show, that's just a bit of my credentials. And I also want to say up front, too, that while this is all subjective, my views as they relate to my thoughts on previous albums have changed over the years as well. It was really funny because somebody on the Halo forum had pulled up a quote from 6 years ago of my thoughts on Spirit at the time when it was released. And I had put it up there with Violator. And my thought on that album has changed. I do feel like there are tracks on Spirit that are as good as songs from Violator or Songs of Faith and Devotion, Going Backwards, Cover Me, Poison Heart, The Worst Crime, whereas A Revolution to a lesser extent. I still stand by that. I absolutely love those songs, and I feel like it's some of their best work since that trilogy going back to, Music for the Masses, Violator, and Songs of Faith and Devotion prior to Alan's leaving. That being said, the rest of the album did not age very well with me. When I go back and listen to Delta Machine, while some songs have, I've become more fond of as time progressed, there's a lot of tracks on that album that I skip. Same thing for Playing the Angel or Sounds of the Universe. There's things about all those albums that I enjoy, but there's tracks on those albums that I tend to skip. There's a couple on Memento Mori that fall into that category, and I'll share that with you as well. But I will say up front that as of right now, having listened to the record several times, this album feels to me like the first listens were for Music for the Masses, Violator, and Songs of Faith and Devotion. I haven't wanted to listen to anything else other than this album. Now, again, my view might change, but going back to those albums and then moving over to Ultra, like things changed for me with Ultra. I loved that album, but I also knew everything that had transpired between Alan leaving, what Fletch was dealing with at the time, the tour that preceded it, and, the understanding of Depeche Mode making another record. They weren't going to go on tour. This was an album that maybe wasn't going to get made. Dave was still working through his drug addiction when the album started. So, again, I loved Ultra, but there was definitely, in terms of my perception, a dramatic change. Like an era had ended. And with every album that's come out since then, while I've absolutely anticipated them with excitement, none of them really had and grabbed me the way that Songs of Faith and Devotion and Violator, Music for the Masses did upon their first release. Memento Mori so far has done that for me. Now, my view might change. You might absolutely, and I totally expect people are going to disagree with me on so many different levels. But as of right now, these are my thoughts on how I feel about this record. It's always subjective. And so I hope that you'll just carry it with you as you listen to one fan's thoughts about this album. And just know that, my view on some of these tracks may be and probably will be completely different than other individuals. And by example, I have a friend who I know has heard parts of the album. And while he really thinks that Wagging Tongue, the second track on Memento Mori, is a highlight, I give it a 6.5 out of 10. Differences of opinion. So, just putting it all out there up front as I move through my thoughts on this record. I really do love it. I really do. There are a couple of tracks that I would move aside, especially given the fact that the album is 12 songs long. There's a moment on the record where I go, wow, you could have kind of ended it at 9 tracks and gone more of a less is more, something more akin to Violator, and you would have had something, in my view, that was completely solid. Then again, I know that people will disagree with me on the tracks that I would go and remove. So that's my big old massive 9-minute caveat as I get into this, and you're probably going, John, just get on with it already. And so let's do that. All right, so I've sprinkled in a couple of listener feedback emails into my thoughts on every track. I'm basically just going to go through every track and share with you sort of my thoughts, not sharing any of the lyrics just because I do not want to get in trouble with any sort of copyright whatsoever by sharing lyrics from any of these songs. But starting off with My Cosmos Is Mine. This song is dark. It has a foreboding tone to it, ethereal. It reminded me of Welcome to My World in terms of pacing, but a lot better. The pacing is slow. The lyrics are deep. It's very, very layered. And there's a moment when Martin appears in the song, and it really carries it to another level. Every track, in my opinion, on this album has been taken to its true potential. if I were going to complain about the records post, I'll say post Ultra, because I really feel like Tim Simonon did a very, very good job on Ultra. There's a lot of tracks on other albums that I feel like it could have really been made into something else, and they just weren't taken to their max potential. And on this album, it really does feel like this team that they have compiled between Martin and Dave, along with Richard Butler helping Martin write a handful of these songs, James Ford, whose production work I absolutely adored on Spirit, and then Marta Solongni. This team is the best team that the band has had since Alan was with the band and Flood produced. In my opinion, you may feel differently. But My Cosmos Is Mine is definitely a good opener. I imagine that this will probably open the tour. Henry Coe had asked on YouTube, what's the title for the snippet we heard in October during the press conference? So, the snippet that we heard was from My Cosmos Is Mine. So if you remember from the press conference, we heard the snippet of Ghosts Again, but leading into that was this mix of this sort of haunting instrumental track. I included it on the extended version of Ghosts Again that's available up on mynerdworld.net and then on my YouTube page. That instrumental snippet that you can hear Martin's vocals in the background, that's from the end of My Cosmos Is Mine. However, it's different on the track. Like, I'm actually glad we got that snippet, because it seems pretty clear that they removed that from the mix and they made it kind of something of its own for the press conference. So you kind of hear it buried in the mix of My Cosmos Is Mine, but that's where it's from. And there's a lot of layering on this record. I make this comment on one particular track, and I'll tell you which one it is a little bit later on. But if you're familiar with Nine Inch Nails' The Downward Spiral, and you've ever listened to that album with headphones on, there's several tracks on this record that definitely demand good, high-quality headphones, because there is a lot going on in the background of these songs. I know in one of the interviews, and I'll share this with you on another podcast, Marta had mentioned, and it's the last track on the album specifically, Speak to Me. Marta had mentioned, or David mentioned, that Marta was using tape machines and looping things back, and there's a few moments where things are reversed. It's similar in the way that they did in Mercy in You, but not nearly as up front. So My Cosmos Is Mine is a very haunting opening to the album. Really kind of sets the tone for the rest of the record. Wagging Tongue, track 2, which I know a lot of you have heard via the live performance Bad Quality. I like the album version a lot more, much better than what we heard live. It's got a groove and a swagger to it. Lyrically, it seems pretty sparse and short. Dave's vocals are interesting on this track. He's got this quiet intensity, and it's different for Dave, in my opinion, than the way he sung before. I didn't hear him sing it this way on the live performance, and I just wonder if it was too quiet to do in a live setting, and perhaps that's why the live version of Wagging Tongue didn't translate as well as the album version did. There's this really nice middle musical break in the song that I dig quite a bit. But it stays fairly consistent. It kind of what the song starts out as, it moves through until the end with very little variation. In my opinion, it's not a standout track. It's good. Like I said, 6.5 out of 10. It doesn't sound like Sweetest Perfection or, say, The Love Thieves, but quality-wise, that's where it lands for me. It's a good song. It does what it needs to do to set up the rest of the album. I would personally be surprised if this was a single, but I could be wrong. Then you move over to track 3, which we've all heard, Ghost Again. Completely understand why this was the single to kick off the album. I feel like it fits very well with the rest of the record, and it's an amazing song. There is no burn on it at all. There's only one other song that if you had asked me if you could pick another song to have been the single or the next single, and that's People Are Good, and I'll get into that when we get to that track. So moving over to track 4, Don't Say You Love Me. This song, when I heard the sample, gave me chills. The full version is even better. This is a really fantastic track. The lyrics are very interesting. sort of comparing Dave singing in the lyrics, comparing one thing to another. You imagine him singing to a woman. It's when I make these comparisons, by the way, I don't mean these comparisons as it sounds like this or it sounds like that. More just the vibe of it and what it reminds me of. Okay, so it's kind of a cross between Love Thieves and In Your Room, but it's subtle and subdued. It has Poison Heart pacing, like I mentioned in the sample from last week. It's very, very dramatic. It has this really powerful build, and again, Don't Say You Love Me is fully fleshed out. Hearing the whole thing, there is this darkness and vibe to it that reminds me of In Your Room, even though it doesn't necessarily sound like In Your Room. I made some comparisons online on Twitter to being the best album since Songs of Faith and Devotion, and people were asking me, can you compare it to Songs on Faith and Devotion? And again, it's not necessarily because it sounds like Songs of Faith and Devotion, it just has that sort of darkness to it, and the lyrical content of it reminds me of that. There's a Black Celebration tie-in here, too, especially as it relates to the synth work, which I really enjoy on the record. But I don't want anybody thinking that this album sounds like Songs of Faith and Devotion. It doesn't. Memento Mori is absolutely its own thing, and it works as its own thing. Then we get to My Favorite Stranger, which is a track that has grown on me. Again, I heard the live version of this. The album version, to me, is better than the live version. It sounds like the live version they really tried to beef up, but it works better on the album. I was trying to put my finger on what the intro sounded like, and it reminds me of the live mix and the remix of A Pain That I'm Used To that they've done. But again, the album version of My Favorite Stranger is way better than the live version. The music is really good on this one. There's a lot going on. This is a song that you put your headphones on and you hear a lot of stuff taking place in the background. Lyrically, it's, I don't want to say sparse, but there's not a lot there. It has this really trippy middle portion where it almost gets out of tune, very experimental, but it absolutely works. So I would give this one an 8 out of 10. I guess I didn't do my rating on Don't Say You Love Me gets a 10 out of 10. Ghost Again for me gets a 10 out of 10. My Favorite Stranger I would give an 8 out of 10, leaning towards 8.5. No instrumentals on Memento Mori. I'm going to say that up front. No instrumentals at all on the record. And only one Martin Gore track, which gets a 10 out of 10 for me. Now, there's two songs that are massive standouts for me beyond Before We Drown, Don't Say You Love Me, Soul With Me, Martin Gore's song. In my opinion, and I know people will disagree with me, this is the best song since Home. It sounds like something from the 70s. It has this really incredible cinematic quality as it opens, and it's delightfully uplifting. There's this musical note in the chorus that ticks up that I can't find myself really comparing it to. I really, really love this song. And it's one of the best vocals from Martin, in my opinion, since Home. I've heard other individuals say it reminded them of, like, say, Jezebel or Comatose. I could see that, but I feel like it sets itself apart. So, Soul With Me, the lyrics make sense when you hear them to the title of the song. Again, going back to everybody freaking out over the song titles, they all make sense now. 10 out of 10 for track 6, Martin Gore's only solo song on the album, Soul With Me. But Martin is included on a lot of these other tracks. Like, you hear Martin in the vocals, in my view, again, in my opinion, a lot more than I remember hearing him on other albums. Then we get to Caroline's Monkey, which up front I give an 8 out of 10. It's Depeche Mode, but as I mentioned in the snippet, it's very different and really good. I'm honestly kind of blown away that the band has created something so unique this deep into their career. I said this in my snippet review that there are nods to The Cure in this song, I think because of the use of Caroline, again, lyrically. There's a couple other moments in the song where it lifts. It doesn't lift from, but they almost seem like nods to Disintegration off of Disintegration. It really is a cool track. Can't really compare it to anything else. Dave and Martin are singing together within the chorus, and it really, really works. So I think Caroline's Monkey is going to really land for a lot of people. For me, again, I give it an 8 out of 10. I think there are other songs on the record that are better than it, but it is a really, really good track. Then we get to track 8, Before We Drown. This is a Dave track. All the other ones so far have been Martin and Richard Butler. Soul With Me was just Martin. And somehow I lost who wrote My Favorite Stranger. I think that was Martin, too. Before We Drown is Dave, Peter Gordino, and Christian Eiger. The song gave me chills when I heard the snippet. The song was even better when I heard the whole thing. It's one of Dave's best songs. There's a moment in this track where Martin comes in with a vocal that reminded me of I Am You in the terms of repetition of a particular lyric. And there are moments on this record where they do that. In a song I'll get to in a moment, there's actually what sounds like the squeal from the beginning of I Feel You. So online, I've commented a few times that this album feels like a tribute to the career of the band while still being something wholly new. And that's where that commentary comes in. There are just little moments that seem like they were lifted from other songs, like in Caroline's Monkey, and I mentioned this on last week's show. When Dave and Martin are singing in the chorus, I'll give you one little thing. They sing sometimes, and it sounds like it's from Clean. And so there's a moment in Before We Drown that sounds like a Martin vocal that sounds like it's taken from I Am You. This is a really, really great track. It builds nicely. The synth work is fantastic. An absolute repeat for me. Love it. 10 out of 10. Then we get to track 9, People Are Good. I have not been able to stop listening to this song. I feel like it's going to be divisive, that some people are going to absolutely hate this song, while other people are going to love it like I do. The fact that this Depeche Mode song exists is shocking to me. This is the one that has what sounds like a sample of the squeal from the beginning of I Feel You. It has I'm not that familiar with Kraftwerk, so I'm pegging it more of the Construction Time Again era, Some Great Reward era, but I also know that the band was in the early part of their career really inspired by Kraftwerk, so I know that there are elements of Kraftwerk in this song. It has this 80s lyrical, the lyrics throw me back to, I'm really wording this poorly. It's the most Depeche Mode song that they've done in 30 years. It's Dave singing in his mid-20s, and it's almost as if I would not be shocked if I heard that Martin Gore wanted to write a song like People Are People, but wanted it to be better. You could put it next to Something to Do, Everything Counts, and then Now This Is Fun. It is just a fantastic track. I honestly can't tell you how much. I mean, I absolutely love this song. And if they had closed, this is what I was saying before, if they had wrapped up the album on track 9 with People Are Good, I would have been completely happy. So again, I can't wait for people to hear it. I just really think it's going to be divisive. All right, so I'm wiping out on this song. And just even talking about it, I want to hear it. The lyrics are kind of goofy. I guess that's what I want to say too. The lyrics are kind of goofy, but again, it reminds me of 80s Depeche when they had kind of goofy lyrics. I'm just shocked they made this song. All right. So moving over to track 10, Always You. I give this one a 5.5 out of 10. It's got a cool, mellow vibe to it. Not quite skippable. It has some moments in there that remind me of Secret to the End from Delta Machine. It could have been a B-side. It's serviceable. It's got good synth work. But it hasn't really landed for me up front. I listened to it before I did the podcast today, and I was like, well, maybe it's not nearly as bad. By the time I got to the end of it, to the end of it, I was like, no, it's okay. It may grow on me, but it certainly wasn't the strongest track on the album. When we get to Never Let Me Go, I'll give this a 7 out of 10. It's up-tempo. It's got some interesting guitar work. To me, this is the So Much Love, Soothe My Soul, Soft Touch, Raw Nerve. Better than those songs, in my opinion. I like those songs, but I feel like Never Let Me Go is better than that. I can hear the guitar riff. It reminds me of the riff break from Fragile Tension. I mentioned that on my snippet review last week, where it kind of wails in Fragile Tension. But it's just kind of there. It works, but I give it a 7 out of 10. Speak to Me, the closer on the album, has really grown on me. Listening to it several times now. This is a slower ballad sung by Dave. It is the most Dave of all the Dave songs on the album. It's really good. It's a full track. It reminded me initially of Stay from Paper Monsters, but I'm going to kind of take that away a bit. It's better than that. Its deconstruction at the end really is what makes this song. Dave's voice is really strong. It's bold, not quiet, but meaningful. You can tell Dave cared about this song quite a bit. And this was one that he did with James Ford and Marta Solongni. The music sounds ominous, but it really is juxtaposed against Dave's tender vocals on this track. And it works very well as a closer. I would probably give it an 8 out of 10 at this point in time. I think initially I would have given it more of a 7 out of 10, but now that I've had some time to spend with it, I give it an 8 out of 10. So that wraps up my review on the record. I do feel at the moment that this is one of the best albums since Songs of Faith and Devotion. I imagine myself listening to this much more than anything else, but I'm typically like that when albums first come out, so my opinion may change. I like the cohesiveness of the lyrical writing on this more than Spirit. I didn't particularly care for the political nature of several of the songs. It just kind of lost me, that more outward instead of inward. On this album, the lyrics get much more inward than they have before. And to me, that's when Depeche really stands out and shines, is when they go with more of that inward lyrical writing. And as I said at the start of the show, I really do feel like this is the best team that they've had since Alan was in the band and they worked with Flood. I hope that you love it as much as I do, and I can't wait for everybody to get a chance to hear it. And I hope you enjoyed my review of it. As always, you can ask me a question. Not sharing it. You can drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment if you're listening up on YouTube. I'm going to go and ice my injured leg and probably give another listen to the album, maybe. So, thank you so much for checking it out. I really do appreciate it. They'll be back next week. Got a lot of listener feedback to get to, a lot of audio from the reviews that have taken place over the course of the past week and the promotion of the album to share. So no shortage of Depeche Mode material to go over here on Depeche Mode, the podcast. So we'll be back again next week. As always, I hope wherever you are that you are happy, you are healthy, and you are safe. And I'll talk to you again in about a week. As always, if you want to go and support my nerd world, head on over, and the Depeche Mode, the podcast, head on over to mynerdworld.net. And if you like science fiction, check out my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. All the details are available at mynerdworld.net or amazon.com if you search for Jon Justice. Talk to you again next week. Bye.